Hello, and welcome to Shatter Our Souls with Novaria. Today we are tackling as much of the tabantha region of Breath of the Wild as possible without the use of conventional weapons. Just a quick refresher, those weapons include I cannot use swords, bows, or shields in any capacity. This leaves most combat and all puzzle solving as using the rune system of Tishika Slate. Without further ado, I have a quick question for you. And it's one that I've kind of dabbled with and talked about to some degree. And it is quite simply, what if the heroes of Zelda are not all that hero-y? What do I mean by this? I suppose is the next logical question. And what if Ganon's not as bad as we make him out to be? Let me be clear, I am not saying that he is good. Rather, it's a thought question, more of a, how do I want to call it, more rhetorical in nature. The goal of this is that if Ganon were good, then what is it that led him to the path of that he took? Now, depending on which game you look at, there's a couple different ways you can look at it. Ocarina of Time is the one I'm most familiar with. This version of Ganondorf was born of Twinrova and opted to look for a positive, or rather, look for means of supporting his village or the people that he was born to, the Gerudo. He was born to become their king. And this is something that could very well be propaganda perpetuated by someone like Twinrova, but I personally believe it's more deeply rooted, that there's something more to that role of Gerudo King than meets the eye. And so, to me, it feels as though there's a point of Ganondorf is not evil for the sake of being evil. Rather, he is a product of his time. See, unfortunately, due to the fact that the Gerudo are effectively pushed off into the desert, a region with very limited resources, very limited trade, because let's be real, they don't have much to trade. That would mean that there is one other way for these people to actually make a living, to thrive. And it's right under our noses. They're often depicted as thieves, as vagabonds, as rogues, and sure, absolutely, the Gerudo go out, find husbands, and come back and have more kids, which are women. No big deal. This all happens on a regular basis. But the needs of the Gerudo are 9 times out of 10 satisfied through thievery and stealing as need be. They can't necessarily trade, they don't have the resources. They have sand. Maybe they could make a glass blowing facility or something. I don't know. But the thing is that Ganondorf, being the king of the Gerudo, is tasked not only with the well being of his entire cohort, but also what the future may hold for them. And so it stands to reason, at least for me, that Ganondorf in the early parts of Ocarina of Time was attempting to find different means of saving his people, so to speak. Now, don't get me wrong, cursing everything he came across really doesn't make things very positive, but for an individual who needed help, but with nobody willing to help him, I truthfully believe that he did the best he could with what he had. Was it positive? Absolutely not. Was he evil? Absolutely. But it begs the question of a lot of villains in especially franchises made by Nintendo are in many ways victims of circumstance. You can see this again in Wind Waker to a degree, where Ganondorf wants to effectively escape the Hyrule underwater. He wants to regain a level of freedom that he lost when Hyrule was flooded. And Ganon seeks out the Triforce of Wisdom and the Triforce of Courage. These two pieces are what he needed to effectively undo the curse that was placed upon Hyrule. He wanted to bring Hyrule back to the rays of the sun, to give the world a new, fresh reality of Hyrule. And I don't necessarily see this as a negative. But again, it begs the question, is Ganon the bad guy? Because the isolated islands across the entire ocean meant that, in theory, resources that were necessary for survival, things like perhaps agriculture, were in less than stellar supply, which would mean that 90% of all communities in the Great Sea would be entirely reliant on fisheries. Fisheries are good. Fishing is a good thing. It is something that I believe the people of various villages should be able to use. But again, we've come back to this issue of Hyrule was theoretically in dire straits if you dig down and pay attention to the little pieces of information thrown throughout the franchise. Most islands across the Great Sea did not have enough landmass to house anything of major value. Most caverns went way too deep and were infested with monsters, as well as locked away. And so you ended up with this situation where most of humanity was locked on one of 3 islands. And that was kind of a bummer situation for them as well. But don't worry, it gets better. We jump ahead to Twilight Princess. Twilight Princess is the next Ganondorf encounter that really showcases just how powerful this character actually is. And it's during his execution ritual that I want to point out. Ganondorf, in his execution ritual in Twilight Princess, was in a very significantly bad spot. And he was sentenced to the Twilight Princess by the 6 sages of Hyrule. This was meant to be his final call, curtain call, if you will. This was meant to be the thing that really ended Ganondorf's reign. He gets sent off to the Twilight Realm where he becomes a spirit of sorts. He can't necessarily survive as what he is in the Twilight Realm. And so instead, he becomes the next best thing, a god or figurehead within the Twilight Realm, preying on the people around him in order for him to come back. Now, I'm not saying that what he does in this circumstance, especially to and with Zant, are good. But again, I argue, he doing what he can with his circumstances? And the reality is, absolutely. His circumstances are incredibly dire. He wants to survive. He wants to push himself to new heights. He wants to be more than he currently is. And unfortunately, many of his actions do lead to more dire consequences for most of the people of Hyrule. But it's always the people that are marginalized, such as the Twilight, such as the Gerudo, such as, well, those are the 2 main ones. But these groups are constantly pushed to the side in their own stories. And so, to me, it makes sense that Ganon would be defender of the little guy, if you will. The one who steps up when everyone else steps back. These are the Ganondorf appearances throughout The Legend of Zelda that come to mind most frequently. The other appearances of Ganondorf include Tears of the Kingdom. But Tears of the Kingdom is ironically the appearance of Ganon that has the least involvement in the general story or theme of the character. In Tears of the Kingdom, from what I gathered from the stories, Ganondorf came to Hyrule in search of power and came across the sacred stones that the Zonai had that were meant to bestow power and really help the various people out as best they could. These two were meant to be used as tools, not as greater weapons of power or mass destruction, something that Ganondorf very much wanted to use them for. The Tears of the Kingdom version of Ganondorf was lustful, he was power hungry, and I dare say had more access to resources in this time period than he did in the other three that come to mind. All other appearances of Ganon throughout the franchise have been appearances of Beast Ganon. And so, to me, it sounds more like he had less of a semblance of himself, of who he was and who he expected to be. As such, I kind of have to go on the I don't necessarily know if it's necessarily him at his best or brightest for these moments. So, for those, I'm going to go with Ganon is kind of being evil for the sake of being evil, but I argue that he was pushed over the edge to become evil. Now, part of the reason why I bring all of this up is because what would happen if Ganondorf was forced to become the defender of Hyrule? Now, throughout the Legend of Zelda franchise, Link has been the hero, or Zelda in the case of Echoes of Wisdom. These two individuals are incredibly notable within the Zelda franchise for being holders of the Triforce of Power and Wisdom. They're expected to be the good guys. The one who lusts for power is the one who's going to be the bad guy. This is how it typically works. And so I have to look at this from a couple different perspectives. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. This is the ideology that comes up throughout literature as a whole, stating that anybody who is granted power of any variety, be it physical strength, be it political might, you name it, there is a level of corruption tied to it. The reason I want to bring this up is because there are rare circumstances wherein Link technically has to succumb to power in order to complete the task at hand. Now you might say, well, what are these circumstances? They must be very few and far between, and you're right, they are. The one that comes to mind most aptly is actually Zelda Majora's Mask, wherein Link has to don the Fierce Deity Mask, which, in its item description, labels it as something that feels evil, that there is something more to it. It has it has an anger to it. And this is important for the actual statement of the story, because it is stated that the Fierce Deity and Majora effectively had a standoff in ancient times. This duel that lasted for 5 days, 5 nights or something. It was absolutely ridiculous. But the thing is that they were never able to beat one another. They only match one another. And it was through both Link's strength, the power of the Triforce of Courage, and the power of the Fierce Deity that Majora was finally put to rest. That this wayward soul, or being of the mask, were actually given a chance to rest, to be able to settle. This is, of course, the important aspect to take away from the story of Majora's Mask. But it brings to light other questions. Because if Link could theoretically be the bad guy, who would be the only person who would be able to stand up to him? Because as far as the monsters, the political system, the everything of Legend of Zelda, Link is pretty untouchable. If you look at any iteration of Link and the Swiss Army knife style of approach to problems that Link has, be it the Dominion Rod, be it the raw power of the Begoron sword, or simply the Master Sword as a whole, theoretically, Link is nigh untouchable. Now, would Link be worthy of the Master Sword if he were the big bad evil guy? Probably not. But the statement still lands where an individual may be righteous but be misguided. And this is, of course, where I want to bring this attention to it. My belief of this circumstance is that if Link were ever the actual bad guy, it would be because somebody pushed him to it. Now, we can see a little bit of this actually in Super Smash Bros. Brawl, where when Zelda was presumed kidnapped or taken by, in this case, Mario and Pit, he, of course, launched into battle, aiming to fight against these two to the death. He was ready to throw hands without the full information because he saw someone else theoretically hurt Zelda. Now, this is the important piece that I want to tie into this, because Ganondorf in the same game is the villain. But if you take the time to collect the Zelda and Link figures within the Great Maze, not the Great Maze, the subspace areas, you are able to gain Ganondorf as a party member, somebody who is willing to help out in this circumstance. Now, don't get me wrong, he's not exactly happy with it, but he'll do it because it needs to be done. This is the takeaway that we need to look at with this. He will not be happy to actually fight back against this. He wants to be the one in charge. But Ganondorf would theoretically defend Hyrule if it came down to he wanted the power for himself. Would it be better or worse for Hyrule? Who knows? But who knows? That's just the thing. Zelda has shown up a few times as the hero in the absence of Link, but Ganon has never shown up in a heroic role in his franchise. Anyway, that's enough rambling for now. The Tabantha region of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is ironically one of the regions that has the least distinct lore tied to it. We know it's where the Rito have made their home in this era. We know that the area surrounding it typically ends up with a freeze and thaw cycle. We know the Snowquill set of armor has a cold resistance. All of this makes sense for the game itself and why the Rito are where they are and who they are. However, there are a few things about this region that just kind of don't make a whole lot of sense, at least to me. First and foremost, this region is the one that is most heavily tied to the completion of the Divine Beast to be able to access the various shrines. My guesstimation for it is simply that the game wants the player to go to each region and actually explore it, but comparatively to Gerudo Desert, Zora's Domain, and Death Mountain, this region is actually the one that we see the least of throughout the entire franchise. And to a greater extent, we see next to nothing of the Rito throughout the franchise as well, appearing in, I think, 2 games total, Phantom Hourglass and Wind Waker. So, to me, that makes sense. However, we also have to acknowledge the fact that Breath of the Wild's regions are also kind of segregated in weird ways. This one, thankfully, has the most natural borders to it, having a canyon on one side and a mountain on the other too. Effectively, the best way in or out is via bridges or snowboarding, and who doesn't like snowboarding? So, in this case, I personally believe that this area is fantastic. It is very commonly one of the first regions of Hyrule that I visit. This particular playthrough being one that I opted to be a little more consistent with certain areas and less with others, on the basis of I know I'm going to be going through every area of Hyrule probably twice. So, oh well, right? The lovely thing with this region, however, is that it is theoretically an area that has, how do I want to word it? There's a lot of resources in this area that we can take advantage of. There are at least 3 stores within the Rito homeland, or within the Rito village. There are plenty of trees to knock down for wood. There is a Hinox up the road. There are all sorts of minor enemies, slimes, you name it, all ready to battle in this area. It's resource rich, it's full of food, which means theoretically the Tabantha region is actually one of the better regions in Hyrule to gear up for a major battle. But we also have to acknowledge that the Tabantha region is one that you can't go into unprepared either. You're going to prepare as you go, but not having winter clothing or enough hearts to handle the black Hinox means you're pretty well in some dire straits if anything goes wrong. On the eastern edge of the Tabantha region, we also have the, I suppose, the cliff drop off. Now, the cliff drop off is home to many of the stone taluses, which are, of course, a mineral dense, rich monster type that are meant to be more challenging to approach at early game, but reasonable to beat by mid to late game. Now, the reason I want to bring this up is because theoretically, at this point in time, I should have enough raw strength and weapons, tools, etc., that anything that you would throw at Link at this point in time would be perfectly fine. At this level of hearts, at this point in time, 3/4 of Hyrule have been looked through, checked around, poked through for gear. This version of Link should be incredibly strong by comparison to our starting point. But due to the fact that most weapons, tools, etc. cannot be used, this version of Link is ironically significantly weaker than what I would ordinarily have at this point in time. Okay, it's cold and the warm doublet doesn't do enough. Cool, so we are turning around and we are going to go to the Rito village. The wonderful thing about going to the Rito village at this moment in time is there is a shrine in the middle of the village, which is reasonable to get through. We might be able to set up a couple of the side quests, and once we get all that sorted out, we'll be heading north into Hebra. This will complete the last of the easy to accomplish shrines of the region, and we will also be able to test a theory that we might actually be able to access Divine Beast Va Meadow. Now, what? Divine Beast Va Meadow? I'm sorry, how? There is a series of side quests that need to be accomplished within each region to be able to access each of the divine beasts. Now, we've talked at length about how Varuda has a side quest where you effectively have to shoot it with shock arrows. This is fine. This is expected. This is normal. Shock arrows are perfectly reasonable. However, we have the second. We can't fire an arrow without a bow. Therefore, Ruda is off the table. How about Rudania? Well, you need to get Yunobo out. Yunobo needs to be able to launch out of a cannon to be able to access the various regions across his section of the world. And that's all well and good. How do we aim the cannons? with a hammer. That I can't hold. So that's out of the question too. And I'm already a little worried about being able to access the Vanab or Vanaboris because Vanaboris is has a number of side quests tied to it, including but not limited to breaking into the Gerudo Valley or the Gerudo settlement. No big deal. Just wear the right clothing, walk right on in. Perfect. How about dealing with the Yiga or the Ice Cube puzzle? Ice Cube puzzle? No big deal. Just run for your life and hope you don't get shot by a fire arrow. Perfectly reasonable. But breaking into the Yiga hideout and fighting against the leader of the Yiga, Master Koga, could be a little bit more of a challenge just on the basis of I have next to nothing to throw at him. But who knows? Fourth and finally, you have to follow the current sage, Riju, on her quest to get close to Naboris and bomb its feet. Now, I have to be very clear about it. You have to hit its feet with a bomb. And I am currently unsure whether or not getting a bomb arrow to do the job is going to do enough. There is a possibility that it will be enough with just the rune bombs, but I'll be honest, I have never actually gone to test this yet. And in the same vein, the target practice at the Heber Mountains with Teba could theoretically be possible without the use of a bow. But if it requires the use of a bow, and by use of, I'm meaning literally that if it requires you to hold a bow at all, then it's a no-go. I have opted that the only weapons that I will ever be able to use in any capacity would be the Hylian shield, bow of light, and the master sword. And only in absolutely necessary circumstances, which just so happens to be the final boss. If I cannot beat the final boss without the use of these tools, then they come in. Until then, that's all she wrote. So anyways, now that we have reached the Rito village, there's a couple things we want to pick up. First and foremost, we're going to need the snow quill set. It is pretty well the only piece of armor that is warm enough to handle the colder climates of the Heber Mountains to the north. But more than that, we are also going to be dealing with, how do I want to word this? Weather is going to be a huge problem going forward because we have the Heber Mountains, the Gerudo outskirts, the main desert, which is incredibly hot, and we have the Faron Woods to the south of main Hyrule that also is incredibly rainy, stormy, etc. So we have 3 out of 5 regions left that all requires some form of gear to prevent Link from being injured, more actively at least. Reality says, because I'm not using metal gear to begin with, I shouldn't have too much of an issue, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. Speaking of rather being safe than sorry, at the moment we're about half of all shrines complete. At the rate we're going, I'm going to be having my goal is to finish the first round of Hyrule with Eventide Island. I think that makes the most sense. At that point, we'll be picking off smaller side quests that may be completable and working from there. This includes, but is not limited to, the camera quest, finding a way to get a torch to the Hateno Ancient Tech Lab, is going to be a bit more labor intensive than I would like, but not impossible. The second major one is once I get the camera, I need to snap a picture of each variety of the guardians. A walker, a decayed guardian, a tiny guardian, and a flying one. Once all 4 guardian types have been accounted for, that'll open up another shrine. And that'll be it for that. We need to get the 2 other dragons, Nidra and Farosh. And theoretically, these 2 are going to be more than reasonable to complete. Nidra, however, due to its nature as being more combative, as it is covered in what would be considered the malice of this world, it's kind of a challenge to get everything put together enough to actually make it work. So that one might be a little bit of a challenge. The 3 brothers, I'm planning more of the stealth mode approach over the brute force approach, as while I usually go the brute force approach with the 3 brothers of the Southern Hyrule, I'm not so dense as to think I can do that with bombs. And that pretty much sums up the majority of the hard shrines for the duration of the rest of the game, as far as notable ones that I am very well aware of. There are others that are going to come up, of course, but these ones come up as being more difficult just by the nature of what they are. And while I'm thinking about it, next time we are going to be taking a trip into Snow Peak. The Hebra Mountains. Snow Peak is an area in Twilight Princess that is, ironically, very close to Zora's domain, which I think would mean it would be the Lanayru Mountains. But unfortunately, due to Zelda's ever-changing landscape, it is very difficult to justify or guesstimate which locations were where in which games. The point I was going to bring up with it is that Snow Peak was originally in the mountains near Lanayru and Gerudo deserts. The reason I want to bring this up is because, theoretically, with the Rito having evolved from the Zora clans, that would mean that Tabantha region might have been Lanayru in a far-off past. This is theory, this is who knows, this is all jargon, but it's the best I got with what I currently have. But, who knows, right? It's all conjecture, it's all theory, because unfortunately, due to the nature of Zelda being an everlasting, ever-changing landscape, there will always be some level of disagreement between the fans as to the various locations that you end up in. Today, we're going to finish off with the Windmill Shrine. Now, Windmill Shrine is it's a relatively simple one. Your goal is to get the fans to hit every one of the fans. And once you have every fan activated, it becomes much more reasonable for you, the player, to actually... Once you have everything activated, you can go through and head into the final area, which houses our lovely Sheikah guy who's going to help us out and get us another Spirit Orb. That's pretty well and good. What I like about this shrine is that with any level of gear, this one is completable. But this one is not one that you can just rush point A to point B. There's a level of thought and consideration that goes into this shrine that doesn't appear in all that many shrines across Breath of the Wild. And I think part of it is just the fact that we as gamers don't necessarily expect it a whole lot. But I also believe that part of the problem with various game mechanics in Zelda come from the fact that we are. How do I want to word this? A lot of the problems with the puzzle solving in the new Zelda has to be with the fact that most of the new Zeldas have a dynamic puzzle solving mentality, where you, the player, can solve the puzzle in as many ways as you see fit. If you decide that you want to play the game one way and nobody's stopping you, might as well. And so, for me, beating the game with only using bombs and the items on the Sheikah rune or the Sheikah slate are it's a perfectly reasonable way to play the game. Because why wouldn't you play the game that way? That's just why not? If there if there is a game, gamer will break it. This is one of the fundamental rules of the universe. If there is game, gamer will break it. And so, with this mentality, because these shrines need to be completed by anyone at any stage in their adventure, it effectively becomes more about learning the game's mechanics in the more simplistic era or areas that they may lie. By the end of the game, you should be a true master of everything that Zelda Breath of the Wild has to offer. Anyways, if you like what you see, drop a like, leave a sub, and we'll catch you next time.